Welcome, everyone, to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. I am Joe, and I'm sitting here with Brigham, our lead designer of our products here at Outdoor Vitals. And I decided to bring Brigham on to talk about what goes in to your backpacking gear. Now, I am not an expert backpacker. I'm probably the least backpacker savvy in the office. I like backpacking, but I was hired as an entertainer. So I decided I needed to learn this. You guys might need to. You guys might be interested in this, especially if you're a hardcore backpacker and you want to know more about what you're buying when you're getting backpacking gear. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, literally as nitty-gritty as you can get on this episode of the podcast, where we're going to be talking about textiles and fibers. Are you ready, Brigham?
I suppose so.
Okay. Well, what is a textile, and what does that have to do with backpacking? Backpacking gear.
Well, first of all, backpacking gear, for the most part, is made of textiles. What is a textile? Textile is like a flat arrangement of fibers to create like a malleable, usable material. But the term textile is very broad. Like carpet is a textile. Carbon fiber, what people generally think of carbon fiber, that's a textile. Some kinds of, there's all, like, textile is very broad, and it's generally like the less refined stage of what ends up being a fabric, or a less usable or final product.
Now here's a question for you. So I'm looking at wood panels behind us. Is there wood fibers? That doesn't count.
The wood paneling behind us would not be a textile.
Would not be a textile. So
No.
what differentiates that between?
It's not like a man-made arrangement of fibers to create a flat, like drapable type surface, right? Or what did I put in the training? Yeah, I mean there's some form of like of interlacing and arranging fibers in a certain way.
Okay. So it's man-made of some kind? Is that important in textile? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a textile
so
is...
it can't just be a leaf.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It's a manufactured
Got it.
arrangement of fibers, as like a fiber is a raw product. But yeah, to make a flat, like think of something like a sheet. Mm-hmm. Like a sheet is, made of fabric, but it's the same, like to visualize that, right? So again, carpet, sheets, like tarps, those are made of textiles, but the textile is just a more broad term for like a wide variety of things. And then when you further focus the application of a textile for certain purposes, then it generally becomes more of a fabric classification.
Okay. All right. So I got here flat arrangement of interlaced fibers, generally a more broad, unfinished product. That's what you wrote down on our. This is actually, we're working off of our work training. We had a meeting about this. What was that? 2 months ago? 3 months ago?
It was a while ago.
Yeah. And never saw you more excited in my life than when you were talking about.
It's fun.
Fabrics and textiles and yarns. So Joe's referring to we started doing a monthly what I call team product training meetings, where basically I just kind of give little seminars to the rest of the team whose job isn't the same as mine, so they're not, they can't be expected to
be familiar with a lot of the terminology that I use and the things that I do with my job. So it helps keep like everybody else in the company like informed or aware of some of the things, so that they can, communicate like intelligently with our customers or with industry and
if they're
stuff
asking
like that.
about materials specifically when it comes to this kind of product training, and that seems to be something that's I guess occasionally they do get those types of very nitty-gritty questions in the product support team. Do they always have to go to you? Do they always have to refer to you? Is that why you do the training?
I don't know if I know I get the questions. I don't know if they always go to me, but yeah.
All right. Well, you guys are going to have to forgive me while I open up a diet soda here. So, fabric. What is a fabric in comparison to a textile?
It is more of an end product used as a material. Think of that in terms of building materials, right? If you have a house, like the drywall, sheetrock, that's a material used for building a wall, right? Carpet, that's a material. Sheetrock is not a textile. Carpet is a textile. But fabric is the more refined, usable product to build another finished product.
Okay. And so what is a yarn in comparison to a fabric? I'm looking at it. We're going.
You're going through our notes
because if you ever say, okay, it's made out of this stuff nylon with this kind of weaving pattern or whatever, you want people to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, because it does. It's certainly helpful. There is a little bit of a bit. There is a bit of a trick with advertising where you just like say what it actually is. We know you're an expert on this stuff. Tayson's an expert on this stuff, as far as I know. And so when we have that in our advertising or something like that, all it does is give you like kind of an air of like whoever's putting, I'm not saying our company, but any company that's putting out information about their product and what it's made out of and going like, well, this is made out of I'm making up a number, D12 Ripstop Nylon.
That's a good fabrication. Right
there. And so, but if you're the customer, maybe you want to know what that means. So we got to know what these terms all mean. So what I would have assumed before I did this training that a yarn was a type of fabric.
Okay. Well. Yeah, and again, like this is part of the reason why I started wanting to do these team product trainings. Was for what you just described, so that people have a general base of knowledge that, as I kind of described to our team, that's probably like 1 to 2 steps deeper than we anticipate our customers would have, right? Yeah. So we should be able to communicate with customers or potential buyers, be able to communicate about our products intelligently and to a level that's 1 to 2 steps more in depth than the customer. But also, I also think it's important that. I understand, in marketing, like we can't give like really in-depth technical information because, frankly, a lot of it would be pointless anyway. Like it just, the net effect isn't positive, But if we are going to communicate certain things about our products, then it needs to be accurate.
Yeah.
So whether it's really basic level or more in depth, wherever that level is, like I just want to make sure that we can communicate it accurately and correctly, and so that's another kind of reason why we're having this conversation and
well,
why we did that.
A podcast is a long form thing, and if people want to listen to this, they can listen to it. If they don't, if they want to go on to interviews or whatever we're having the next couple of weeks, they can wait for it.
Yeah.
What is a yarn?
So back to what is a yarn. So a yarn is, it's a long, right? Think of it, I'm trying to think in terms of like what people can relate to. Think of it as like a string, right? Think of like your grandmother or somebody that loves to sit down and knit, a homemade pair of mittens.
We'll go into knitting too.
Like I think that's probably the most generic like reference people will think of if they think of yarn, right?
Yeah.
And that stuff is called yarn. But it's important to make the distinction that yarn is what makes fabric. And then we'll go one step earlier than that too. But so to answer your question, yarn, think of it as like really, really, skinny strings, hair-like structures that are very, very long that are used to weave fabric. So fabric is made out of yarns. People, again, this is another reason why we wanted to do this team product training, within our team, is because I was noticing like some people use incorrect terminology, and going back to making sure that we are all on the same page and everybody is communicating correctly and accurately. One of the common things that I hear, certain people in the office mix up is thread and yarn, and things being made up of threads or yarns, and it's okay. But again, I want to make sure that the correct information, the correct terminology is used consistently, so that within our company it's consistent, and for the audience listening that it's consistent, because there may be people out there that actually do know the difference between thread and yarn and fiber, and so people like to do their research too, so we don't want to come across and make what we think is a unimportant distinction, or we incorrectly say something. So
you want to be flippant with it.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And because that just leads to like inadvertent misinformation, right?
Yeah. So I have on here, fibers make yarns and threads. Yarn makes fabric. Thread, which we haven't even gone into yet. Thread is used to sew fabric together.
Yes,
so is correct. Thread a type of yarn, or is thread?
Thread is made of fibers. Thread is made of fibers.
Yes. But is thread defined by what it does?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I've tried to make those three sentences pretty simple and clear, like in terms of what we want people to understand. And so at least if we're having a conversation in another podcast about something and somebody mentions fibers or somebody mentions threads or yarns, that everybody's on the same page. So fibers make yarns, which make fabrics. Fibers also make thread, which sews fabric together. And there's many different classifications with all three of those categories.
So I have on here, we got categorization of different types of fabrics. And so because it's a fabric, it's made of different types of yarn, right? So that could be multiple different kinds of yarn or a single kind of yarn, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
It could. You could use different thicknesses of yarns. You could use different composition of yarn.
So let's say I have a shirt, and it's 20% polyester and 80% cotton.
Okay.
So the cotton and the polyester, those are fibers and yarns.
Yep.
That are then, what are they, threaded together?
Yeah, they're either you mentioned a T-shirt, that's most likely going to be a knit T-shirt. So we don't want to get too far ahead. So you were talking about classification or categorization, and with the example of a T-shirt that's 20% polyester, 80% cotton. There's a lot of variability in what that actually can look like and what that can mean. They can use like completely separated 100% polyester yarns, 100% polyester or 100% cotton yarns, and just use different ratios, the 20% versus the 80%, and knit that together. You can also make yarns. A single yarn can be made of cotton and polyester, or fill in the blank.
Oh, okay.
Kevlar and polyester, or nylon and lyocell. So an individual yarn can have a breakdown of composition as well. So it gets microscopic, and and then from there it gets molecular. So, yeah.
Can I ask you, when you buy clothing,
yeah,
just at a store, just to buy something off the shelf,
yeah,
do you ever like look really closely at the fibers? You get your glasses out and try to figure out how they knit the T-shirt together? Like, do you know if it'll shrink in the wash? I'm just wondering. It's a question.
No. I mean, I don't really buy stuff at stores anyway much anymore. But I also,
all your clothing is supplied by Outdoor Vitals.
It's more and more, and most of it's like prototypes anyway.
Yeah.
So, but no, I don't get out the little magnifying glass and inspect things. I can generally tell by how something feels, and then obviously if you just look at the tag and look at the composition, and once you have a base knowledge, then you can kind of extrapolate and make a lot of accurate assumptions about what something is made of or how it's made.
So we have on here on different categorizations of fabrics. Are these the only categorizations of fabrics, the three you have listed here? You have woven, non-woven, and knit.
Those are general categorizations, and I'll definitely put out the caveat / disclaimer that this is definitely not all-inclusive or end-all, be-all, and I am certainly not the
encyclopedia
textile science PhD candidate, right? But so in fabrics, generally you have woven fabrics, you have knit fabrics, and then there's a classification that's very common of non-woven fabrics. And with wovens and knits, there's a very deliberate interlacing of yarns. It's by deliberate, I mean the arrangement of how that's arranged is very particular, and it's engineered, and it's designed, right? Like it is just as designed as the skyscraper building. Like the placement of every bolt in a skyscraper is deliberate, just like in a woven or a knit. Like that's all deliberate. There's some general structural patterns that are pretty common amongst basic wovens and basic knits. Now, a non-woven, it's not necessarily very patterned or deliberate. It's almost like a smattering, or just like bunch of yarns laid out, and however they end up interlacing, that's how it ends up.
Is that like a piece of paper, like where they crush wood down?
Kind of like that. And if in our audience, like Tyvek is a very common talked about fabric or textile that's used. Tyvek is oftentimes used in building construction for the walls. You've seen them put up that white paper, looks like paper, before they'll put the brick, or before they'll stucco the outside of a building or something, or put up siding. Yeah, that's Tyvek. That's a non-woven textile. And but like in backpacking, a lot of people will cut it up and use it as a footprint underneath their tent because it's very durable, it's waterproof. But that's non-woven. That's a non-woven non-woven textile.
Okay.
Yeah.
You do have a couple examples written on it. Ripstop Nylon. What is Ripstop Nylon?
So Ripstop Nylon is a very basic woven fabric.
Okay.
There's different weaves, like in woven fabrics. There's different weave patterns that you've heard of, like twill, like your twill jeans or your twill khakis. Like twill is a type of weave. Plain weave is like the most basic weave, and that's what most Ripstop Nylon is. It's just a plain weave. It's 1-to-1. It's one yarn going, perpendicular to another, and then over and under, at 90-degree angles.
Is that like a basket?
Well, a basket is also technically a name of another weave. But anyway, yeah.
I think we'll get more into that later. Ripstop Oxford Nylon. What is that?
Oxford is usually just like a plain weave.
Okay.
But yeah, twill. And then like knits, there's different knits as well. Warp knit, weft knit, interlock. You can kind of create different textures with various knit patterns, like rib knit. You can create different functions, like rib knit. The collar of your T-shirt, that's rib knit. If you look at it, see how it's got those vertical orientated ribs?
Yeah.
And if you pull on the vertical orientation, nothing really happens. But if you pull this way on your collar, you'll see that rib, like an accordion, kind of spreads out.
Yeah.
Built-in stretch of the rib knit.
So what? Okay, so I have on here dragon wool as an example, and our dragon wool. What the type of weave that you guys have for that? The type of fabrics and fibers that go into our product, the dragon wool.
Mm-hmm.
Why choose those? Why make those decisions? Trying to get into this. So what is dragon wool made out of, first of all?
Dragon wool is made out of merino wool, polyester, and nylon.
Okay.
And dragon wool is a pretty engineered knit fabric, where the knit on the inner face is different than the outer face. So it's without it being two separate knit fabrics bonded together. So which is, it's why the fabric itself is more expensive, and it takes a lot more engineering, a lot more calibration of the knitting machines. And so like the inside is a tighter knit that's merino wool, with some nylon in the yarn, and that is merino wool next to skin. It's really soft, uses very low micron wool fiber. And then on the outside, so on the inside of dragon wool, it looks like a pretty common, just like warp knit fabric surface, right? But on the outer surface of the dragon wool, it's mostly polyester, and it's a jersey knit, which jersey knit, think of like a soccer jersey or a basketball jersey. It's kind of got those little like sort of diamond-shaped, not holes, but like
there's definitely a lot
spaces.
There's definitely a lot of like air going through it,
Yeah. So if you kind of look at a jersey knit, it generally looks like it's got a bunch of little cavities in the surface or something like that. I don't know what the good word to call that is.
Yeah, it's difficult. This is an audio medium.
Yeah.
And you definitely need some visual aids for these weaving patterns. But
yeah, so that's a jersey knit, and that you can create functionality of a garment by engineering how the fabric is knit or woven. So like, for example, with dragon wool, we want a very high contact, soft surface against the skin to pull moisture, absorb moisture, and pass the moisture through to the outer surface of the garment. So merino, it's a hydrophilic fiber, so it's going to absorb. In fact, it actually absorbs and transfers vapor before it turns to a liquid moisture, and then does the same thing with liquid absorbs that, spreads it out, and which helps it pass through the garment, which is what you want, so it gets the moisture off your skin. When it hits the polyester outer, which is a very maybe porous is a good word. Like if you look at the surface of jersey knit, it's porous. So that facilitates the expulsion or the transpiration of the vapor and the moisture as it passes through the garment, because it's a very open structure of the fabric, right? And then also being polyester is hydrophobic. It doesn't want to hold onto water. It does not tend to hold on to moisture. So once it hits the polyester, it starts to evaporate much quicker. So there's a good example of functionality built into the yarns that the fabric is made out of, and then the knit structure that creates functionality. And then there's other functionality of a knit, because the way knits are, they're loops that it's like interlacing loops. It's a bunch of loops, and so inherently there's stretch built into a fabric that's knit, because those yarns have room to shift or expand out, which also aids in breathability. So that kind of went off on a tangent there about knits and fabrics. I don't know
That's
if we were
what this
going there,
podcast is. This is a podcast that is tangential and about this nitty-gritty stuff that like 5 people will care about.
Sweet.
But that's okay. All right. Fibers.
So
it
fibers.
all starts with fibers.
It does.
Individual hair-like structures. Now, you mentioned that the dragon wool was made of polyester, merino wool, and what was the other one?
Nylon.
Nylon, okay. And those are different types of fibers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to make sure that I got this.
Well, yeah. Fibers are made out of all those different things.
Okay.
So there's categorization and classification of fibers as well.
Okay. So what kind of classifications do we have here?
So let's start with fibers, and then we'll move through the progression.
Okay.
So we get, and this is not end all be all, and I'll probably for sure miss some things, forget some things, not include some things. Yeah.
Okay.
That's because we just dropped in here and started recording. So fibers, again, fibers are what makes yarns. Yarns make a fabric. So starting with a fiber, you can have natural fibers, synthetic fibers. It's not really accurate to say, well, man-made fibers versus non-man-made fibers. Well, because in the end, you can make man-made fibers out of natural fiber structures, natural components.
Okay.
So there are engineered fibers that come from, well, it takes man-made engineering to to gather or to make usable fibers out of natural materials.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, like, take wool, for example. Like a wool, the fiber there is just the hair. If you were to go and pluck a hair off a sheep, like that's a wool fiber. It's not usable yet because man hasn't arranged it to be a usable piece, right?
Okay.
But so there's another categorization of fibers within, like, say, natural fibers. Well, what's in the natural world? There's plants and animals that have fibers. Now, plants, the most common one is cotton. The oldest man-made fabric of natural fibers, I believe, is linen, which comes from flax. So man figured out a way to take a plant and extract the fibers or find useful fibers of that plant to make yarns out of, right? So within the natural fibers, you've got plant-based fibers, which are generally called cellulose fibers. And then you have animal-based fibers, which are protein fibers, like wool, alpaca, cashmere.
Silk?
Silk is an interesting one. It is an animal fiber. And there's something unique about silk that we'll get into later. But it is a protein-based fiber. And there's there's all these different ways of being able to identify down the fiber base, whether it's a cellulose or a protein fiber. And interestingly enough, it all is like very commonsensical, like protein fiber. There's a burn test. What does your hair smell like when you burn it, right?
Horrible.
That's how you find out whether a fiber is a protein fiber or cellulose fiber. What is paper? So paper, right? Mm-hmm. That's a cellulose fiber. Comes from a plant. Yeah. And so that's how you identify, like, what kind of fiber am I working with? What kind of yarn is this? If you burn it, if it smells like paper, cellulose fiber. So
interesting. I remember I'm going back to like elementary school, maybe middle school. I feel like I did some sort of experiment where we figured out how different fabrics or whatever they were, how they burned. That's cool. I remember like some of them would melt and some of them would slowly burn or whatever. Yeah. Some of them would like quickly like shrivel up.
Yeah.
Whole bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, okay. All right. So it's all part of that.
So you've got plant and animal natural fibers, right? For some reason I feel like I'm missing something there, but I'll move on. And then
synthetic.
And then you've got synthetic manufactured fibers. Those are like very they're made by basically mixing chemicals, by creating chemical reactions, and then they're comprised of molecular chains that comes from the chemical reactions, right? And then the most common, synthetic fibers out there are nylon and polyester. Like I think most people listening to this, even if they're not even into gear, will have heard of nylon or synthetic or polyester. They're basically both plastics, right? They're fossil fuel based. Like nylon, the base fossil fuel used for the chemical reactions is coal. Polyester, it's petroleum. So they're both fossil fuel based.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So you create chemical reactions to create long molecular chains. This is all obviously molecular, submicroscopic. But in the tangible, what you actually see is basically to create a nylon or a polyester fiber, you come up with a solution. Like think a liquid. You're looking at like Caro syrup or something, right? In a beaker, and then you can engineer certain properties by adjusting the molecular structure that exists in that solution. So whether you want something that's going to end up hard or brittle or soft, malleable, have certain durability characteristics, you can adjust, for example, in nylon, the number of carbon atoms in that molecular chain. So you've also heard things like polymer, right? Polymer is, again, it's a type of terminology used to refer to the molecular chains. You've heard like monomer. Well, a polymer is monomers in a chain. So you can engineer different characteristics and properties into a solution, and then you can also engineer certain things as that solution is turned into a fiber, and how that fiber is taken from the solution to a dry, tangible fiber, which is, again, like a long hair-like structure. Excuse me. Anyway,
I'm keeping that in. I'm not editing that.
That's fine.
Out.
That's fine. So there's polyester, nylon. There's others. There's like I said, you synthetic fibers they're totally engineered, and you're basically trying to like create something for a certain purpose that you have a lot more control over the end product. Whereas like natural fibers, like you're trying to make the best, you're trying to get like as much out of it as you can, but you are kind of like you're given parameters, right? It's limited because you did not
limited. Exactly.
put the DNA in that sheep, right? And so it's synthetic fibers. They're kind of more fun to talk about and think about because you can do things. And there's different chemical reactions that you can make different fibers or different solutions to make fibers out of. You know, you've heard of like Dyneema and Spectra and other there's probably other branded names for what really is the same base fiber, and like it's a pain, it's a mouthful, but you can have, you know, you've also heard of polypropylene, polyethylene, and polyethylene is like a very high level basic level of a solution or a compound, molecular compound. So there's all kinds of different directions you can go. So like the Spectra that we use in our backpacks, that's an ultra high molecular weight polyethylene fiber. That's the same as another popular one out there is Dyneema. So they use the same molecular structure, the same chemical combination and reaction to create a solution, and then so the components are called the ingredients of the soup. For Spectra and Dyneema is different than it is for nylon, which is different than it is for polyester, which is different than it is for polypropylene. But it's pretty cool. So once you have, you were about to
go ahead.
Once you have, with a synthetic fiber, right? So then you've got the soup. Polyester. What's more common with polyester is that they'll make the solution and then they'll extrude it into thick ribbon, like literally like think thick ribbon, okay. And then they chop that up. And in a lot of the raw goods of polyester, that's kind of how it's transferred from supplier to supplier.
Just like chunks of plastic?
Little chips of plastic, okay. Right? And then when it gets to the fiber spinner or the spinner, right, the spinning facility, then they basically melt that back down, or they put it to a certain temperature that it can pass through a spinneret, which is, think of a spider, think of Charlotte's Web and spider silk, right?
So raw materials going through something.
Passes through a spinneret, and it comes out as, think of like fishing line, right? A hair-like structure that's plastic, basically.
Okay. But much smaller than fishing line.
Yeah, much smaller than fishing line. And so, but nylon's the same way. It's spun through a spinneret, and you can create different cross-sectional structures of a fiber by the shape of the spinneret. Think of like the noodle makers when you make up the mash for a noodle, and then you push it through those. Yeah. Pushes through a bunch of holes and it comes out squiggly, or you could like make those shaped like a star or a square or an oval,
and that would give it different properties.
Yeah. When it's turned into a yarn, and then when all that's
shape of the fiber.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Which is really cool. It's really fun to work with those things, and those are synthetic fibers. Like I said, there's glossing over a lot and probably
it's got to be an endless list of, and they're probably still people are still experimenting with that stuff.
Totally,
I assume.
Totally.
So when we talk about Micron and Denier, what are we talking about when we're talking about fibers?
So Denier is a measurement of the density and or thickness of a fiber, but it's also more commonly used in the density and or thickness of a yarn.
Okay.
So if you hear, 30D sil nylon, you're talking about a 30 denier thickness of the yarns that are woven together.
What is a denier? Like in terms of how big is that?
Oh, I put it in the product training for you guys, so it's documented somewhere, but I can't keep track.
Mass in grams.
Yep.
9,000 meters of fiber.
Yes. So.
So that's how much it weighs over that.
Over 9,000 meters.
Amount. That's a lot.
Yep. So the den in denier it refers to the density, the DEN in density.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So is it just because they don't have any other type of measurement for it because it's way too
Well, and it's probably something
too
that's
light of a fiber.
Once they decided to figure out that out, they didn't want to ever deal with something like that again. So that just became like the standard or something.
So what is considered thin on the denier side? What's considered heavy on the denier side? Sorry, light and heavy.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll try and keep it within the scope of what's relevant to our podcast and our industry, backpacking. So like something below 30 denier would be, that's a very, very fine yarn.
Okay.
Very, very skinny. Think skinny, thin, however you want to put it. We've worked with things that are a 7D, and when we say 7D, 30D, that D is referring to the denier, which is referring to the density and or thickness. So 7D is very thin. We frankly haven't felt comfortable really making anything with the 7D components that we've had because they're...
Is it brittle?
Durability is
okay.
a substantial shortcoming.
The lower the number on the D, generally, I'm sure this is not for everything, would that mean less durable of that type of fiber?
Yeah, that's a good generality. It's a good generality. But yeah, to answer your question, probably somewhere around 30D and below is getting really, really, really fine, really light. Really.
What's the lightest that we do here?
So our TopQuilts sleeping bags are made with a 10D nylon.
Okay.
So that's it creates a very thin fabric. And you can also equate as long as you're thinking single layer, like you can translate the denier of a yarn to the thickness and weight of a fabric. So generally, in a woven fabric, as long as you know that it's a single layer, like a 10D fabric is going to be lighter and thinner than a 30D fabric.
And denier is used for synthetic measurements?
Yeah, like for the most part. And then there's like, I think, Tex is another distinction that's more used outside the U.S. Like denier is like the most common, especially within the U.S. and it's more used with like synthetics.
Okay.
Yeah, like the what would be used for like natural fibers is usually micron. So like oftentimes with merino wool, like people want to cite like a number to give a reference to like how fine the wool is. Micron is the thickness of that little hair that comes off the sheep or the goat or the alpaca.
So it's the thickness of the hair, but is it necessarily the thickness of the yarn or the fabric?
Can be, for sure.
Can be. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But micron is more commonly just used as the reference to the fiber thickness itself. So with natural fabrics from natural yarns, micron is definitely like the fiber level.
Okay. So could you give us a range on when it comes to, let's say, our socks that we buy, our merino wool socks?
Socks probably use a higher micron because they need way more durability. Think of the pressure and the repetition of pressure that goes into a pair of socks. And the bottoms of people's feet are generally more or less sensitive. They're usually more hardened, calloused. So like you don't necessarily need like the softest, finest wool touching the bottom of your foot. You might not even be able to perceive it because you don't have a ton of finite feeling, on your heel, for example, or the outside edge of your big toe. So like with socks, they would use like a higher micron, something probably like 20 plus, whereas, 18 micron is a very fine merino fiber. That's a very fine wool fiber that's very soft. What people oftentimes will kind of think about with wool is like itchiness and scratchiness. Like people don't like that.
Yeah.
So like the higher the micron, the more the scratchier it's going to be, the more it's going to irritate people's skin. So the lower the micron, the softer, and the better it feels against the skin.
So when we're making products that are supposed to be against skin, we have some products in the future coming out like that. We have the Dragon Wool uses merino wool on the inside, like you were saying. What kind of micron level are we looking for in a product like that here? We're an ultralight backpacking company, so that's a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, and our products follow along with this, would be like between like 18.5 and 17.5 micron.
Okay, and that's pretty light.
Yeah, that's a very fine wool fiber,
and generally less, for most people, less itchy, less scratchy.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of that, okay.
For sure.
All right, I'm just making sure I can follow this. I'm sure that
that's what we want.
I'm sure you've repeated yourself. I just have to make sure that I have to understand this. So we have here a list of kind of common fibers.
Yeah.
And what they do. So when someone's talking about polyester or nylon, cotton, or wool, specifically those ones, we can kind of delve into that because those are really common ones.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me go back to fibers one little bit.
Go ahead.
Which I think it's good to know. So in fibers, there's different lengths of fiber. So especially in natural fibers. Natural fibers, the length of the fiber is never any longer than how it came off its origin. Whether that's a plant or an animal, you're not making that fiber longer. However you cut it off the sheep, that's the length of the fiber, right?
Okay.
So those are called staple fibers because they're short. They have an end length, right? That's a classification, is staple fiber. That just means short sections, they're shorter. Is there a benchmark to what constitutes short? Probably, but think of something like in feet to inches, like staple fiber, little sections of fiber because that's as long as it ever existed in its life cycle. Synthetic fibers, their original state is called a filament. So synthetic fibers, they get spun and they're, thousands of feet, if not many, many miles long. It's just that spinneret starts and the fiber gets extruded through that spinneret, like into a giant, like car-sized roll of fiber. Usually with synthetic fibers, they're spun into yarns at the same time because it's what's called a filament fiber, or a filament fiber just means it's just one continuous length of that fiber that, consider it infinite, never ending, right? Mm-hmm. Until they shut the machine down and the giant roll of fiber is done. But it's all one piece. And you can translate that into yarns too. They'll make a yarn at the same time. So they'll make a spinneret with, say, like, totally arbitrary example, 5 holes. So 5 fibers come out and they join together and they create a yarn right then and there. You've heard of monofilament, like monofilament. That's like very common fishing line. That's just a single hair, single fiber of that, and that fiber is the yarn. So a yarn can be multiple fibers or a single fiber, but it's a filament. It just means that it's one continuous piece. There's technology that you can take a filament fiber and then you can at the same time spin staple fibers, think short length fibers, around it or within multiple filament fibers, so that you get different texture, different properties, different function of the fabric, and then so you can that's how you can introduce a natural fiber into a synthetic fiber.
You mean of the yarn?
Yeah. As you make a yarn, you can as you make a synthetic natural yarn.
Okay.
You're taking you're taking that synthetic fiber and you're spinning natural staple fibers onto that yarn to create, a blended yarn.
Yeah. And that'll make the fabric have different types of properties.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I did have a note on here. You wanted to get back to silk. So before we hit up these common
So in those
fibers.
classifications of staple versus filament, everything but silk in the natural fiber world, all natural fibers except silk are staple fibers. Silk is the only natural filament fiber that we know of.
Okay.
So think a silkworm. That silkworm, think of it as the vat of a synthetic solution that goes through a spinneret. Like that whole thing is the silkworm. Mm-hmm. So it's like got the solution, it's got the hole, and it extrudes that silk as a filament.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I thought that might be what it was.
Which is why silk is so filament yarns have great softness. Because if you think they don't have lots of little jagged edges of fibers poking out, right? That's why silk is so soft and smooth and has that sheen.
Okay. Well, let's get down to some of these, at least 4 of these really common fibers. I guess we can talk about Dyneema and Spectra a little bit. If you don't have any notes on those, but anyway, all right. Let's talk about polyester. Very common.
Very
common in clothing, common in our gear.
Yep.
What are some of the properties of polyester?
So again, think of it as plastic based, right? Petroleum based fiber. And general properties that are useful in our area of the world, in our industry, for people to know of is it's a synthetic fiber. It's very, very hydrophobic, which means it's difficult for water to adhere to it. Mm-hmm. And I like to make those terminology distinctions because there's no such thing like a fiber doesn't have a conscience, right? Yeah. A fiber doesn't have will or desire.
So it's not actually
I don't like saying things like something doesn't want to hold on to water. Like that's like a way for humans to like make a connection. But in terms of just like helping people really understand that it's the chemical molecular structure of polyester is such that it makes it hard for water to adhere to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't absorb water. It's hard for water to stick to it and therefore absorb into it.
Is this accurate? 0.4% moisture regain.
So 0.4% moisture regain. So that's a measure of, if you're to put it in a controlled moisture, like you're dictating the moisture in a room or in the environment that fiber's in. It's the percentage of water that it basically absorbs.
Okay. So, and if anybody's lost, hydrophobic means generally does not hold on to water. Hydrophilic means it holds on to water.
Yes, it is
polyester
water
is
absorbent. Yeah. So and phobic, that fear, phobia.
Yeah,
So
phobia, and then
phobia, hydro,
like Ophelia,
loves
like Hamlet's
water.
love interest.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go. So says on here, very good strength and abrasion resistance.
Yep.
Good for wash and wear.
Yeah, that was one. So polyester was like a big breakthrough in like laundry care and garment care, because it's relatively inexpensive. When think about like fabrics used to have to be made from 100% natural fibers and yarns. Think of the work that takes place to, at the very rawest level of materials, the plant or the animal, the work that takes place to make a functional garment, right? Well, that made, for example, wool was very common, cotton was very common, but it made the maintenance and the care for those garments more rigorous and a lot of room for error. So like, for example, wool, like a wool suits are still like top dollar suit. They're very that's a nice suit. But when people started figuring out ways to make synthetic fibers, right, to make something less expensive that's easier to take care of. So polyester was a huge breakthrough in like wash and wear. It became kind of known or notorious for its ability to just like, get it dirty, throw it in the laundry, and not worry about it.
It also doesn't shrink, right?
Right.
The same way that cotton does.
Right.
So that's something like when you're buying clothing specifically, it's like you don't want to get something that's 100% cotton. Not most of the time. I don't because I don't want to have to deal with it in the laundry.
So it's just way more forgivable in the laundry department, right? So when you say it has very good strength and abrasion resistance, so it's interesting in textile classification, like very good is a classification. Like there's like
very scientific.
It's like pretty common sense though. Like, can you think of any word that you would use to say that's better than very good?
Not at the moment. Not while I'm pressured here on the
Exceptional,
podcast.
excellent, outstanding.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. You
so
can pull out the thesaurus. Yeah.
So like, but it's funny because like in the textile word, like those things matter. So like very good strength and abrasion resistance, that's a classification, and it is how it sounds. Very good is very good, right?
Okay.
So anyway.
What about nylon? We got nylon here, another common synthetic fiber.
Yeah. Again, it's another plastic. Interesting thing about nylon, like nylon, you can like your cell phone could be made out of nylon, right? Your watch band could be made out of nylon. Like, yet a tent is also made out of nylon, or pants are made out of nylon. So it's just that it goes back to like you're engineering whatever you want with nylon. It's pretty cool.
Fabric density or the density of the piece itself.
Yep, and then that base solution, you put in the ingredients you want at different levels to create the end product that you want. So it's another plastic. It is still classified as a hydrophobic yarn fabric, but it does actually absorb more moisture than polyester, like 3 times more. You know what I mean? It's just interesting because like that's not like massively perceptible. Because what's the number that I have
it's
now?
2.8
to 4%. So like 5 to 10 times more. But if you're thinking 2.8 to 4%, that's a very low percentage. And there's a cutoff somewhere for what classifies hydrophobic, and this is well below that cutoff. So in the end, like polyester, it's very hydrophobic. What that means is when it does get wet, because it does not mean that it can't get wet. So it will get wet. It just dries very fast because it's very difficult for water to adhere to the fiber. So think of that with nylon, 2.8, 3, 3.5, 4% moisture absorbent, right? It absorbs that moisture, but it's also still not easy for that water to adhere to the fiber, so it also wants to dry out faster. So Nylon is also hydrophobic, but between the nylon and polyester, nylon, it does absorb or hold on to more water than polyester. It has classified as excellent strength and abrasion resistance, so a notch higher than a classification higher than polyester in strength and abrasion resistance. There is more stretch in a nylon fiber, yarn, fabric.
So it has excellent strength and abrasion as opposed to very good?
As opposed to very good.
Okay.
See that distinction?
Yeah.
That's not arbitrary. There's parameters that establish what is what. And so So nylon is a classification higher in terms of, think of it, durability and strength.
What is let's say our Shadowlight Backpack, which, by the way, links to all of our excellent gear in the description of this podcast, by the way, or our description on YouTube, which you guys can go check out our stuff. Our Shadowlight Backpack, it's fabric. What is that made out of again?
So
there's a nylon in there, right?
Yes, for sure. So let's break this down into this conversation, right?
Okay.
So it's a woven fabric. It's a ripstop woven fabric made out of synthetic materials, meaning it's made out of the main weave. The main woven fabric is nylon, 100% nylon. And then the ripstop, which is it's an extra set of yarns that comes in at a specified interval to create that grid pattern that you see. That's to prevent if a tear or a hole is introduced. That's to prevent the spreading of a tear because it's separate yarns that are woven through to kind of put a stop to a tear. So the ripstop portion is Spectra fiber, Spectra yarn. So we use Spectra yarns for the ripstop portion and nylon for the main woven portion of the backpack fabric. And
I guess we will get into Spectra let's get to Spectra next, just because we just brought it up. What are the properties of Spectra in comparison to nylon, and why did we use it that way?
So Spectra has very high abrasion resistance. Its strength to weight ratio in terms of tensile strength. Think of like pulling strength, how much it can withstand it's like exponentially more than nylon.
Okay.
And again, the abrasion resistance is substantially more than nylon. And then the strength, like I said, the strength to weight ratio of a UH MWPU fabric like Spectra or Dyneema is incredibly light. You know, in my area, you know, in my job, I kind of roll an eye a little bit at a lot of the marketing talk that's, you know, everybody wants to talk about, Spectra will float on water. It's so light. It's stronger than steel. It is. For its weight, gram per gram, Spectra fiber is stronger in tensile strength than steel. But really, that's just so irrelevant to backpacking, right? Like, anyways, I just think those things are funny. Okay. But those are like the talking points that a lot of people like to use in terms of like Dyneema and Spectra. It's incredibly light for its strength. It's incredibly durable and very strong.
Mm-hmm. And you have that. Why did you weave it with the nylon? I'm curious. Because nylon is also pretty strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to create a stronger end product, a more durable end product.
Okay.
One that would hold up to abrasion in terms of like really, really, think worst case degradation, right? Kind of think of like if there's a chain link fence, and then you've got the steel, right, of the chain link, and then if you were to have, what if that fence also was made with like, I don't know, cotton or nylon that filled in all the gaps, right?
Okay.
Like what's really taken the brunt of everything? chain link, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the ways that we think about it for having the Spectra ripstop there. There's tons of tensile strength, so the strength of the fabric itself. So Spectra also doesn't stretch. So having basically kind of like the framework of the woven fabric being non-stretchable, so it's not going to stretch over time. It's going to have really good abrasion. So that Spectra fabric will hold up to the abrasion and degrade much less over time. Therefore, if you think over time, the surface of a Spectra fabric taking the abrasion, it's taking it instead of the nylon.
So that makes it last longer.
So it'll last longer.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So ultimately, like, we want to use some Spectra in our fabric in terms of, especially in, using it in the ripstop portion to just make a stronger fabric. Mm-hmm. Think of it that way.
Well,
stronger, more durable fabric.
Spectra, what was the weight of our, do you remember these? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Weight of our Spectra and weight of our nylon in that product, in the same product.
So like in the Shadowlight, we use 2 different fabrics that both use Spectra. Mm-hmm. So the Shadowlight Backpack, in some areas we use a lighter fabric, and in some areas we use a heavier fabric.
And it's all based upon where it needs to be.
Based on where it needs to be for maximum durability and minimum weight. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in the areas where we want to reduce the weight as much as possible, the fabric is made of a 100D nylon and a 200D Spectra.
Okay.
So the Spectra yarns are actually thicker than the nylon yarns.
Is that heavier by weight too, like the D?
Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
right.
But the end product is one fabric,
right.
So its weight is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So in the high wear areas of the backpack, the fabric is made out of a 200 or a 210D nylon and a 400D Spectra.
So I'm actually trying to get to is why not make it all out of Spectra? If it's the strong thing, is it the weight of it?
So
because we are trying to go ultralight here.
Right. So what you'll see is most backpacks or any other fabric that is made of like 100% Dyneema or Spectra, say like just UHM WPE, those are incredibly strong, like, tensile strength wise. They're incredibly light. The fabric options right now are not great for that application, with the durability for abrasion resistance or puncture resistance that we want. So most you'll think of like very common fabric is DCF, Dyneema Composite fabric. And that's branded. So Dyneema is a brand. And it uses the Dyneema fiber, but then it uses I don't know if resin is the word I'm looking for, but it's almost a lamination on top of it. And they're incredibly water resistant, very strong for tensile strength. They have some issues with like punctures and like pinholes.
And the nylon's better at that?
And the nylon is better at handling that.
Okay.
And the other thing is we want to find a really good balance of if we're going to spend a lot of money on something or we're going to create something that is going to require a lot of our customers' money, we're only going to do it if it is a night and day massive improvement. Mm-hmm. And so we haven't found that that's balanced well with the offerings that are out there right now.
Okay.
Because we want a very lightweight fabric, but we want it to be a very good balance of lots of properties: abrasion resistance, tear strength, water resistance. Yeah. we don't want to just focus on one thing. We want the overall package to be the best balance of performance. If we only focus on making, say, a backpack waterproof, well, then we're discarding or disregarding other performance characteristics that we're not comfortable just dismissing like that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does answer my question. We got two more kind of common fibers to go through. Cotton. Properties of cotton. We all know that it pulls in water like crazy.
So, yeah. So cotton is very
hydrophilic.
Very, very hydrophilic, very water absorbent, and it also doesn't dry fast. Cotton can be very soft. Cotton has a very good feel. Like cotton feels great.
It does.
And it should be noted, like, don't dismiss cotton just because you don't want to use it on a winter backpacking trip, or just because, just because you don't want to use it for performance. Like, doesn't mean don't ever buy anything cotton because it's worthless. It's not worthless. Cotton makes a great fabric for certain applications. Like
what would those applications be?
Like everyday wear?
Yeah.
Very comfortable. Cotton fabrics tend to breathe very well. A knit cotton breathes very well. It's very comfortable. And I think this is also underrepresented and misunderstood or underappreciated is people think, oh, cotton is not a performance fabric. That really depends on your geographic region, because why do we even wear clothes, right? Like in terms of as human beings, for the most part, outside of our dwellings that are climate controlled, we wear clothes to protect our bodies, protect them, to keep them clean, to protect them from harm, and to regulate our body temperature. Regulate means that we need to keep it in a very narrow window of 98.6 degrees, right? Mm-hmm. So for most applications that we talk about in our world, where we live and where we go, that's very common across most people that are interested in backpacking.
We're in a temperate climate.
We're in a temperate climate.
We go into the mountains.
Yep.
Which is even cooler.
Or if we don't go into the mountains, we go, where else do we go? But think in terms of what's kind of underrepresented is hot climates. So cotton does have a place in hot climates. So,
okay, so like if you're hanging out in Ecuador?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So why? Because it breathes really well. It does hold on to water, which helps the cooling process of the body. So, convective heat loss, right? Or evaporative cooling. Like that's generally what we try to avoid when we're trying to keep ourselves from going hypothermic. Mm-hmm. But when it's hot, people forget it's not just about protecting yourself from the sun. You definitely want to protect yourself from the sun, but in really, really hot environments, whether it's the desert or the jungle, cotton has a place because it helps cool your body. It helps convective heat loss, and it breathes really well.
So let's say we're going. I'm just wondering from your personal experience. Let's say we were going to the Virgin Canyon, just down the road here, like Mojave Desert, in the summer. So we decided to go hike that. Would you wear a cotton shirt?
Probably not.
Probably not.
No. But that's, like I said, like there are certain times and places in the world where like cotton still has a place. It's not. Okay. It's just, all I'm saying is like, just don't dismiss it. Like,
right.
For a lot of times, you hear like cotton kills. Like that's a very commonly used, maybe overused term because it doesn't. Used,
I only heard it when I started working.
Yeah, I know. in this industry, and it's just like and sometimes that's just not true. Sometimes it's just not true.
Cotton heals.
So alternately, so who lives in extreme cold? Well, there's a lot of indigenous people in Arctic and subarctic regions of the world that, guess what? They are living and they're thriving. Their civilizations are vibrant and full, and that's their life. And do they have access to polyester and nylon and Dyneema? Nope. Well, how are they alive? Because how are they managing their body temperature? How are they doing that? Well, and this is extreme. Like this is not like really in our window of what the general backpacking world is thinking about.
Sure.
But it's fun for conversation.
Yeah.
In really cold temperatures, like it's not a bad thing to have a cotton outer layer. If it's that cold, you really want moisture to pass through your layers very easily. And so cotton outer layers are very commonly used in Arctic regions, Arctic temperatures, and Arctic clothing systems because it does allow moisture to pass through it. And that's like day after day after day after day living, if you think about it, right? It's not like, just a Everest expedition. Well, that's like Arctic conditions, right? It's probably negative 20 up there.
Yeah.
That's for 48 hours. And that's not like day-to-day living where you're going out and like hunting for a living, right? And living off the land. So I think it's interesting to think of those things like there are still places that certain dismissed fabrics actually still function very well.
Okay.
You don't, like in Arctic conditions, day in, day out, well, you can do pretty well by having some cotton. Where you don't want cotton is like against your skin.
Against your skin, you're wet, sweaty.
Yep.
Yeah. Then the phrase "cotton kills" might actually apply there.
Yeah.
All right. Cotton, hydrophilic, good strength, just only good on this.
Yes.
Good strength and abrasion resistance. 10% stronger when wet. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Just
how the chemicals are reacting and the molecules are reacting to water?
It's just the structure. When it gets wet, it becomes 10% stronger. There's some natural fibers that become weaker when they get wet.
Oh, interesting.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Cools when it dries. And then our last one that's really, and we know that it cools when it dries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our last one here on this list is wool, which is especially, what's the difference between wool and merino wool? Can you
merino wool is
just
it's a more carefully selected wool. It comes from carefully selected sheep.
Okay. Okay. All right. And some of the properties of wool, hydrophilic as well, so it holds on to water. It looks like it holds on to more water than cotton.
Mm-hmm.
So why put wool against your skin as opposed to cotton?
Because wool will actually start absorbing, like I mentioned before, vapor. So wool will, and again, against the skin, you want to keep the moisture, you want to get the moisture off your skin. So it will start allowing vapor to absorb into it and then pass through the garment at the vapor level. That's a gas, right? Okay. So moisture in gas form will absorb and pass through wool. So that starts that process better. Wool actually retains heat when it's wet, whereas cotton doesn't. So when cotton is wet, it does not retain any heat.
Is that
in terms
like
of energy?
On the what is the word I'm looking for? Is it easy to? Are you able to answer why does cotton not retain heat versus wool?
It's just something about the structure of the fiber.
I'm wondering if it has something to do with insulation of the fiber, like how thick the the fibers, I guess, are
the
apart from each
structure of
other?
the fiber itself. And if you think like, wool comes from an animal, and that that animal evolved with that hair to
protect
itself.
Yeah.
So, think of like the cross section of a wool fiber versus a cotton fiber is going to be different. So wool, it regulates temperature. So like I said, it'll retain heat even when it's wet. And then it moves, like it absorbs water and it holds on to water, but water will start to disperse better with wool. I can't remember what your question was.
It was about why. Why does it hold on
gotcha.
to heat versus cotton?
Yeah. So, but that is the thing to note, is that it does retain heat. It is able to still kind of keep some warmth when it's wet.
I assume it's some sort of like insulation with air gaps and whatever. Okay, yeah, all right. What is natural crimp? What is that?
Well, there's
dead air space. Is that what that is?
There's natural. So think about like going back to a synthetic fiber. It's like totally determined what that fiber is going to look like. Well, who's determining what the fiber looks like as it grows out of an animal's skin?
DNA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's no rhyme or reason. It could go any which direction. It's certainly not going to be perfect or concentric. So there's just that variation creates the crimp, which creates dead airspace and loft and the ability to retain some heat.
Well, we have gone very much into the weeds and a little bit over our time. So thank you for coming on to the podcast today, Brigham. I wouldn't mind having you on, by the way, to go further in depth on. You also did a presentation for our work here at Outdoor Vitals for fabrics, so we can go into fabrics and maybe weave patterns, knit patterns a little bit more. I learned quite a bit today. Able to kind of go over that stuff again and kind of ask you some more questions, go more in depth on it. So hopefully this is a good resource for you guys out there, for those who are looking to really understand what's going into their gear. When you're buying gear, when you're seeing a tag on a shirt or whatever, that you are able to better understand what's going on with the stuff that makes up your gear. So once again, thank you guys for listening. If you guys want to leave a comment, you can do so on our YouTube channel. Just do the little comment button. And if you have any questions, by the way, about any of this stuff, we'd love to kind of get into it. Next time I have Brigham on and we're talking about this stuff, we can definitely answer your questions there, or you can send an email to liveultralightpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, guys, links in the description for the great gear that we have here at Outdoor Vitals, the people, the company that is making this podcast possible. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for listening.